Hi folks, Brian Hallaq from Norpoint Training Center. I'm back again here for a conversation about guns. The last episode we talked to our anti-gun friends, so this time I'm going to flip it around and talk to my pro-gun friends. And so if you happen to be an anti-gunner and you're watching this video segment, some of the stuff I'm talking about isn't going to make a whole lot of sense to you, but you may want to watch it anyway. You might find it entertaining or at least educational about where we are as a gun society. So here's my problem with us as gun owners. For some reason, we don't like each other, and we've got to get over that. And there's a very practical reason when it comes to the gun debate dialogue that this needs to happen. It isn't really just that we all stand in solidarity with each other, and that would be nice, but that's not really why I'm bringing this subject up. Let me give you the example. For my anti-gun friends, if you happen to be watching this, I'm going to shock you a little bit in that we as gun owners tend to be kind of monogamous to a particular type of shooting or shooting style. So, for example, take me for example, I tend to be a handgun guy. That's kind of my thing. That isn't to say I won't occasionally shoot a shotgun or a rifle and have fun doing so, but the handgun kind of is my flavor of choice. Others are hunters, for example, and ranges will often have themes like this. If you go to a range, the range might be geared towards hunters who are sighting in for the upcoming hunting season or testing out various loads that they were creating to see what kind of performance they could get out of their ammunition. And then if I show up with my handguns, they may look at me funny. They may even get up and have words with me. They may not appreciate my particular brand of firearms ownership. I happen to sometimes go to a range where they do quite a bit of clay target shooting. And so for the uninitiated, those are people commonly refer to it as skeet, but there's other couple of games that are associated. There's trap and there's sporting clays. Basically, they all sort of have some sort of a disc that gets flung in the air, and then the guy with the shotgun shoots it, and it hopefully breaks apart. And it's tremendously fun, and I'll do it. I've enjoyed it. I'm not very good at it, but it's a lot of fun. And you know, those guys tend to be very monogamous to their sport. You know, I'm not saying they don't have a handgun or two at home, and they might keep one for home defense, but it's not really what's present on their mind. What they think about when they think about shooting is their sport. And so what happens is in the gun culture is kind of an odd thing. When the gun debate comes up, if it doesn't really have to do with our particular favorite shooting sport or favorite type of gun, sometimes we might convey the impression that people who engage in other types of shooting activities are well, they're not as legitimate as us. And here's where this comes into play with the gun debate. I don't think that the majority of the country is anti-gun. I don't think the majority of the country is pro-gun either. I think that the majority of the country is probably gun neutral. And that is to say that there's probably about half of the households in America have guns in them, but that I think the people are still sort of gun neutral. They might have a gun, but they probably don't shoot it, or if they do, it's maybe once every couple of years. Their buddies and them go to the range and they take out the box from the closet, dust it off, and go shoot. And when they're finished, they put it back in the closet, and they don't see it for another couple of years. I consider those people gun neutral. I don't think they have a whole lot invested in the gun debate, and I don't think they care one way or the other. And so what happens, though, is those of us who are avid firearms enthusiasts will be, for example, at a get-together or gathering. Maybe your wife drags you out to the office party or something, and then somebody ends up saying, "Hey, Doug, hey, you heard about that recent shooting? I hear you have a lot of guns. What do you think about those assault rifles?" And you know, you think to yourself, "Well, gosh, you know, I go to the trap range on the weekend and I shoot clay targets. I mean, what does that shooting have anything to do with me?" And you may think to yourself, you know, I don't own an AR-15, and I don't give two shakes of a rat's tail about an AK-47. So what you do is you get defensive and you say, well, gosh, those are assault rifles. What I do is has a rich and storied history. There's a lot of tradition associated with my gun. My over and under only holds 2 rounds of ammunition in it, and I only shoot 1 generally. And so it's a very, very safe gun. It's non-threatening. It has no real offensive capabilities in the sense of the way these assault rifles are used. So yeah, go ahead, ban those things. Because in your mind, what you're thinking is, they'll never come for my shotgun, so who cares? What do I care if they get a bunch of those AK-47s off the street? And here's where the problem with that type of an attitude happens. And actually, strangely enough, it'll even happen within various genres of shooting. For handguns, for example, revolver guys, I've seen revolver folks, when they're asked about the evil clips associated with the semi-automatic handguns, we'll say, yeah, get rid of those things. What do we need? What do we need big giant magazines full of ammo for? My gun holds 6, and that's plenty for me. And they'll get snobby about the semi-automatic folks. So even handgunners, you can't even expect them to talk with one voice. And so the problem here is in the gun debate, in the gun conversation, and the problem for us as gun enthusiasts and gun rights advocates is when you say that stuff and you say it to people that are gun neutral, they're looking at you as if you're an authority, and they're respecting your opinion on the subject. And so what you do is you sit there and you say, well, I'm a trap shooter, or I'm a handgun pistol shooter. I don't have anything to do with this stuff that had to do with that particular act of violence. And so when you denounce that act of violence just because of the type of gun that was used, your friends who are gun neutral just became anti-gun. Because what happened in their mind is they think, well, hey, I talked to Doug and I like him and he seems to be a responsible person. And gosh, if he doesn't like those darn black assault rifles, then there must be something to that because he knows about guns, and who better should I listen to than Doug about this subject? So what you did was you literally just framed the debate in the wrong way. Now, I'm not saying if you are dedicated to a particular shooting sport and you literally don't like another type of firearm because you believe that the firearm itself is in fact the root cause of the violence. If that's your opinion, okay. But I'm not talking to you because I think you're an anti-gunner. And I don't care if you go shooting at the trap range every week. If you literally believe that it is the firearm itself that predicates the violence, then you're an anti-gunner. You might be a baby anti-gunner. You may not be, the 800-pound gorilla of the Brady campaign, but you're still an anti-gunner. And so I put you into that category. I don't think most firearms owners are that way. I think what happens is we get cornered, we get defensive. Somebody sort of suggests that maybe we might have some relationship with that act of violence, that mass shooting, that gun accident, that whatever, and you think to yourself, well, gosh, not me. I have a revolver. That accidental shooting with that child would have never happened with my revolver because I have a 12-pound double-action trigger pull on it. And so that's the fault of that 1911 guy. So, those semi-autos, yeah, if you want to ban those, go right ahead. When you get to that stage, you're an anti-gunner. And I don't think most of us are. I think most gun enthusiasts are actually pro-firearms. I think what we are is anti-violence. I think what we don't like is people, the lowest common denominator, the lowest type of activity being associated with us. And so what we do is we get defensive and say, well, my precious firearm would never do what you're suggesting. And when we frame it that way, what we do is we turn a whole host of people in our lives into anti-gunners. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about framing the debate in a slightly different way. I think what you need to do is you need to recognize that it is in fact not the firearm but the person. And we talk about this, and this is a cliche in the gun culture, but you need to stop and really think about it for a second and really understand whether or not you believe this concept. Because I'm here to tell you, if you if you don't believe that it's the actual person, the actor, if you really do believe that it's somehow the gun, it's the gun that helps create the accident, it's the gun that helps create the act of violence, it's the gun that inspires the mass killer, then at your heart you're an anti-gunner. And it doesn't matter whether you own a gun, and it doesn't matter whether you shoot a lot. At its heart, you're an anti-gunner. And again, kind of going back to the first episode, don't shy away from that. If that's what you really believe, I think you should run with that for a little bit and let it challenge your assumptions. Because I think what you ought to do, if you're a little baby anti-gunner, you're a baby anti-gunner because you have a gun but you don't believe in other people's gun rights, go hang out with the real anti-gunners. I think what you'll find out is you end up coming back to our camp. You end up finding out that some of the things that they believe and say aren't really in keeping with what your values are. But I am more worried about the folks that really aren't anti-gunners, but for whatever reason haven't thought the process through. So if you're a shotgun guy and you don't like handguns, or you're a rifle guy but you like hunting rifles and not quote-unquote assault rifles, you need to recognize that everybody that goes out with a gun and they're safe and they're responsible and they don't send out to hurt anybody or break any laws, they're part of your community and they need as much respect from you as the people in your particular shooting sport. And so as gun enthusiasts, we ought to speak with one voice, and not necessarily politically. I mean, it's nice if we do speak politically with one voice, but I'm really more interested in us speaking with one voice in the sense of we need to stop hating on each other. We need to stop saying, well, that's them and this is me, and my particular persuasion of firearms is not what the problem is. I think we have to recognize that it's really more a function of the shooter. Sometimes if you take a class from me, or you know me in my personal life, you'll know sometimes I'll use the analogy of racism to some of the parts of the gun debate, and because I think it actually applies. And it's gonna offend some people, but I figure my skin's dark enough that I can get away with playing that out, because I've experienced racism from pretty darn much every shade of the spectrum, so I can comment on this. One of the tenets of racism is basically stereotyping people and assigning a trait or a value to an entire group of people rather than an individual. And that happens all the time in the gun world. And the folks that don't appreciate gun rights believe that we all talk with one voice, that all gunners are the same. And so when they hear you as a gunner, or as a gun owner, talking badly about a particular type of gun, you basically confirmed for them their opinion. And that may not have been where you were planning on going. Rather, I think what you need to do is you need to engage them in the conversation. And you need to say, listen, I don't use that type of firearm. I use a different kind of firearm that I think I have more fun with. But here's the deal. I don't necessarily think that the people that use those guns safely and for lawful, legitimate purposes are wrong in doing so. And so the fact that some crazy person may have misused that particular type of firearm that really isn't my flavor, I don't decry the people that do appreciate or are enthusiasts of that particular genre of firearms ownership. And so when we frame the debate that way, what we can do is then we can engage the conversation correctly. Because now your gun neutral friend is going to talk to you more about the practicalities of the gun debate than, in fact, a blanket, hey, all those black rifles are evil. They're not, and so, we shouldn't stereotype gun owners. We shouldn't stereotype people that like AR-15s. We shouldn't stereotype people that like semi-automatic handguns. They come in every shape and size, and people have those guns for innumerable reasons. Some people keep semi-automatic handguns because they like to sport shoot, and there's various sports that are associated with semi-automatic handguns that they have no practical defensive purpose, but the fact that a person might take a similar style gun and commit a crime with it doesn't make the sports shooter an evil person. And so let's not judge each other by the color of our rifle. Let's judge each other by the content of our shooting. Okay, so I borrowed a Martin Luther Kingism there, and I'm very likely to get some really, really angry people commenting on that. But again, I think the analogy holds true. So the reality of it is, as gun rights advocates, as gun enthusiasts, as believers in the Second Amendment, what we need to do is be not afraid to speak with what our true feelings are. And don't get me wrong, if you really do believe that it is the firearm that is causing a segment of violence and that your firearms have nothing to do with it, but those other firearms really ought to be banned, then I'm not saying you're wrong, but what I'm saying is you're not a gun rights advocate, you're an anti-gun person. And I think that to challenge those assumptions on your part, you should spend time with true anti-gun people. And if your values and your assumptions haven't been changed, great, run with it, because now I can debate with you, but now I'm talking to you as an anti-gunner, not a pro-gunner. But I think that the majority of you guys out there that sort of trash talk other types of gun owners, I think you are pro-gunners, and I think that the reason you trash talk them is you don't like to be associated with firearms use that you feel is not representative of who you are as a gun owner. And we need to get away from that. What we need to do is we need to talk about the shooter and the firearms owner as being the problem and what we can do to fix that. Training, education, what have you. But it's not the device. And if you believe it's the device, you're an anti-gunner. If you understand that it's not the device, then we need to frame the debate a different way. So that's my conversation with my pro-gun friends. I guess if I have to put it into a nutshell, stop hating on each other. You need to get out of that. You need to shake that bad habit off. I'll confess to this. There was a time, say 15 years ago or so, you could buy an SKS, a Russian SKS for probably $60, and you can get 1,000 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammo for $80, and you could go out into the woods and raise holy hell. And myself personally didn't care for it. Didn't care for that type of shooter. And I probably was guilty of what I'm talking about right now. I probably trash talked those types of gun owners because I thought they didn't represent me. So I'm guilty of this too, and we certainly all have to kind of examine our own behavior. So that's this part of the conversation. This is for my pro-gun friends. Think about what I'm saying. Think about where that might have come into play in your personal lives, and see if we can't educate and help our gun-neutral friends understand the debate in a more appropriate way. So right now we're not talking necessarily to the anti-gun folks. They probably aren't going to be swayed one way or the other. They probably think that guns are in and of themselves fundamentally inappropriate and evil devices. But I don't think they represent the majority of the country. I think they represent a very small fringe group. Now, let me head off some YouTube comments here. I know some of you are going to say, they're going to bring up the stat that, hey, 70% of Americans believe in some form of gun control, reasonable gun control. Look, I'm not going to be necessarily persuaded by that particular criticism. And the reason for that is most of the time when you actually read how the study is framed, they ask the participant some kind of really crazy question like, do you believe in reasonable gun control that would prevent a violent criminal from attacking you and your family? Well, I mean, gosh, if you frame it that way, I mean, pretty much everybody is going to go ahead and say yes. And that they only got 70% of people to agree to that, I'm shocked. It either tells me that 30% of the public is hardcore gun rights advocates, or I think they smelled the BS of the study. I mean, you could frame any question and get the result that you want. You could frame the same question and say, do you agree with legislation that would prevent a woman from protecting herself against a violent attacker? Most people would say no. Well, then we could tout that around and say, well, the majority of the country doesn't believe in gun control. So that particular stat, if you're going to tell me that, well, the majority of the country is not gun neutral, they're really for gun restrictions, I don't really buy that argument, just because I don't think that the question is framed in a neutral way. And I know there are some folks that are trying to do those studies the right way, but invariably the buzzwords end up creeping in there, and it brings forth the wrong discussion. So I do believe the majority of the country is gun neutral. I also think that some of my gun enthusiast friends, my gun rights friends, end up doing those gun neutral people a great disservice by suggesting that there are people in our community that, by virtue of the type of gun that they have, are not legitimate gun owners. And I think what ends up happening is then the debate gets skewed in the wrong direction. So that's my conversation with you today for my pro-gun friends. I hope that helps. Go ahead and leave us some comments on the YouTube channel. Check us out on Facebook. Call me out. Call me crazy. Call me whatever you want. But I'm hoping that by having this debate in the right way, that we can start the conversation. And again, I understand that a lot of us are going to agree to disagree, but at a minimum, we can talk to each other in an intelligent and civil way. So anyway, Brian Hallaq from Norpoint Training Center. Take care.